Hello, everyone. My name is Maciej Kawecki. I am a director of the LEM Institutes and a doctor and Dean of Warsaw Banking University. And I have a great pleasure and honor to moderate our open meeting. I would like to ask for a short introduction for Bartosz Sokoliński, who is the director in the Industrial Development Agency, organizer of our today's meeting, and later Tony Hush, chairman of AmCham Poland. Guys, the floor is yours.
I will start in Polish, so as usual. Szanowni Państwo, witamy Państwa po raz kolejny na spotkaniu. Jest z nami Paweł Pacek, ale jest głównie duchem i słucha, ponieważ ma córkę na rękach, która jest chora, ale może się przysłuchiwać. Bardzo żałuję, że nie przywita Państwa razem ze mną. Dzisiaj mamy wielki zaszczyt powitać człowieka, który zmienił oblicze naszego świata, wymyślił koło XX wieku, a tak naprawdę też XXI, czyli internet. Tak naprawdę w naszym Weinnovators.club mamy człowieka, który przyczynił się do tego, że wysyłamy maile, że działa internet. Jestem tym absolutnie zachwycony. Dziękuję, że znowu jesteście z nami. Dziękuję, że spędzicie z nami ten wieczór. Chciałem podziękować naszym partnerom wszystkim, Amerykańskiej Izbie Handlowej, Google'owi, stałym partnerom Koalicji na Rzecz Polskich Innowacji, Akademii Ekonomicznej PAN i wszystkim tym, którzy wierzą w nas, wierzą w nasz klub i lubią się tutaj spotykać. Dziękuję naszemu świetnemu prowadzącemu. Dziękuję również Klaudii Tolman, Klaudia będzie tutaj rysowała to, co doktor powie, a ja już nie będę wszystkich przedstawiał, bo to w końcu jest rola doktora Kaweckiego i oddaję głos Toniemu. Toni, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bartek. Dobry wieczór wszystkim. Good evening, everyone. Just very quickly, I just wanted to thank ARP for the continuing cooperation that we have with them and the opportunity to have AmCham participate and support this great initiative to talk about innovation, to talk about new ideas and what the world waits for us, hopefully, as we turn the corner on COVID. As you all know, it's when we talk about the internet, it's so tied now to all the investments that we do. So whether it's in the cloud services, whether it's in related to 5G, whether it's into our research and development or global services, everything is linked together now. So whether it's the Internet of Things or just the ability to communicate, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today without this, black magic that we call the internet. So it's great to be here with everyone tonight. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Cerf and a great pleasure to have AmCham be involved. So thank you all very much. And Bartek, Maciek, we look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you very much. And of course, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Vinton Cerf, internet pioneer, as it was mentioned before by Bartosz, one of the fathers of the internet and vice president of Google. Mr. Vinton Cerf has received honorary degrees and awards that includes the National Medal of Technology and the Turing Award, so-called Technological Nobel Prize. And personally, I would like to say it's an honor to meet you. For someone who, like me, is interested in technology, getting to know you is a great honor. However, I must admit that this time, today, because of the pandemic, I would prefer a live meeting. I would also like to welcome our special guests who will discuss with Mr. Vinton Cerf. Tony Hush, chairman of AmCham Poland. He is a strategic policy, business and communications advisor with 20 years of experience in Poland. Marcin Maruta, senior partner and one of the best Polish law firms, Maruta Wachta. Marcin heads IT contracts practice. He is an intellectual property and IT law expert. Very, very outstanding. Professor Rafał Ome, an expert in the field of emotions, because today internet, it's a combination of emotions, I think, a world pioneer in the area of applied neuroscience. Piotr Mieczkowski, Managing Director at the Digital Poland Foundation, and Tomasz Rożek, one of the most famous Polish physicians, author of the very, very popular blog Nauka to Lubię. Before I give the floor to our special guests, I would like to say a few words, giving our meeting a certain context. Strictly connected with the most important issues from my point of view. The value of data-based economy in Poland alone is currently estimated at 6.2 billion euro, and by 2025 it may even reach 12 billion euro. Today, the value of data exceeds the value of oil. Certainly, data has never been discussed more, I think, than in these days. Data and information management are also one of the most effective instruments to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, I think. So privacy in the context of data processing has become one of the most important topics of the past decades. I was responsible for implementation GDPR into Polish legal system after just a few months of struggling with the absurdities resulting from misunderstanding this regulation. I started to ask myself, are we going in the right direction? Is privacy in such a restrictive sense really compatible with the human nature? And as it turns out, I was not only one having similar observations, because Dr. Vinton Cerf wrote that the privacy can actually be an anomaly. When you hear these words from someone who has developed the strongest data processing engine, the Internet, you wonder if he's right. A few months later, I come across a lecture by one of the most outstanding Polish scientists nominated for the 2019 Nobel Prize in the field of physics and the creator of the quantum cryptography, Arthur Eckert. The lecture was entitled "Privacy is for Paranoid." Later, I had the opportunity to talk to him about it in my technological podcast. He upheld his thesis that privacy is a restrictive sense. It's not only something natural for us. So my question for the beginning is, will the Internet of the future be the one without borders? Will it be the Internet in which data is only worth as much goods that we will be able to receive for it? I invite you all to lecture by our special guest, Dr. Vinton Cerf. The floor is open for you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I have to tell you, as I was listening to the opening Polish, I was reminded of a story that was told of former President Carter. He was an engineer, and you know, engineers are sometimes fairly cheap. And so instead of hiring a translator, professional translator, he brought the Polish desk officer from the State Department to do his translation for him. And the story goes that, that he wanted to convey to his audience how much he appreciated Polish kielbasa. And he said, he thought, I love Polish sausage. But the translator got the wrong verb and announced that the president lusted after Polish sausage. And I don't know whether that joke is going to work, given that you had to translate it from English into Polish, but you can see why professionalism is important in certain conditions. Let me turn my thoughts to what I'll call origins of innovation, because this has to be something which occupies a lot of your thinking. How do we innovate, and what causes us to do that? And one obvious answer to this is often necessity. Something isn't working, something cannot be done, there are barriers that get in the way of accomplishing an objective. Necessity drives us to try something new if the old things don't work. So that's one answer to where innovation comes from. There's another answer, and it comes out of an interesting interaction between science and engineering. If you're familiar with the scientific method, you know that scientists, especially experimental scientists, are trying to figure out whether a theory can be confirmed by making a measurement that is whose result is predicted by the theory. And so the scientist often will go to the engineer saying, this is what I want to measure. Can you help build the equipment to do that? And from time to time, the engineers will come back and say to the scientist, it doesn't work. And of course, one possibility is that the engineer messed up and did a bad job of implementing the measurement. But another possibility is that physics has somehow gotten in the way. And in fact, the measurement isn't possible. And the reason it's not possible is the theory was wrong. And this, of course, is the hazard of being a good scientist, because even though you cling to your theories and you hope that they will predict the results of measurement, if the test says that your prediction was wrong, sometimes you have to go back and discover that your science is wrong. And so again, necessity sometimes forces innovation. In this case, the re-examination of scientific theories, because the engineer couldn't build what the scientist wanted him or her to do. And I find that to be a wonderful source of innovation. Generally speaking, unsolved problems and aspirations that one has often generate a lot of the innovative results that we excite ourselves with. The internet is a very good example of an engineering response to a problem. The Defense Department in the US was trying to use computers to enhance our ability to study artificial intelligence way back in the 1960s. And in order to get everyone to share their results, which was heavily dependent on computing, they decided that the best way to allow people to share their work was to build a packet switched network. And packet switching at the time was considered to be heresy, because the way communications engineers worked was, of course, you use circuit switching, which is the way the telephone system had worked for very nearly 100 years. But that wasn't very efficient for computer communication. And so this alternative idea of electronic postcards, basically, was pursued, even though it was considered crazy by at least conventional communications engineering. The net result was, no pun intended, was the ARPANET, which was the first large-scale packet switch network, followed very quickly by the design and building of a multi-network system called the Internet. And so all of that was essentially pushed on us, not because of a flash of insight necessarily, but because of the need to find a way to implement networking, not only with telephone cables, but with radio and satellite, because the Defense Department wanted to use computers for command and control. And it knew that meant the computers would have to be in ships at sea, in airplanes, and in mobile vehicles, and you can't connect those together with telephone cables. So the internet arose in a very practical and pragmatic way. But once it got into the hands of the general public, once it was available to the private sector, which occurs around 1989 or so, and the World Wide Web shows up in late 1991, suddenly this network is in the hands of the general public. And it was and continues to be astonishing what people figure out to do using this basic World Wide Web system sitting on top of the global internet. There were design decisions made in the global internet, which I think are very important for you to appreciate in the context of enabling innovation. So the first thing is that if you're familiar with the design, you know that it's a layered architecture, and that one of the layers is called the Internet Protocol. It's a very simple function. It takes electronic postcards, figuratively speaking, and moves them from point A to point B with some probability greater than 0. And that's all that it does. It doesn't guarantee delivery. It doesn't guarantee keeping things in order. Occasionally, it even duplicates packets because of alternate routing. And so this layer of protocol is very simple and it doesn't sound very useful. However, if you put on top of it another layer of protocol to discipline the communication, we call this the transmission control protocol, then you get packets arriving in order, you get them checked for integrity, you get them retransmitted if anything happens to be lost, and you get, if you filter out duplicates. So the extra layer of protocol produces a more disciplined communication service. Now, there's another pair of things about the Internet protocol which are important for innovative thinking. The first one is that that protocol absolutely doesn't have any idea how the packets are actually being carried. And so that protocol does not know if the packets have gone over a telephone line, an Ethernet cable, a laser, a satellite link, or something else. It simply doesn't care. All it knows is that there's some bearing capability that it can drop its electronic postcards into. So that's one piece of ignorance, which has allowed the Internet layer of protocol to sweep in any new communication technologies that have come along, even though we could not know ahead of time what those would be. The second piece of ignorance that we build into this Internet protocol layer is that the postcards, if you want to call them that, don't have any idea what they're carrying. You know, a postcard doesn't know what you wrote on it, and the Internet packets don't know what the bits mean that it's carrying as payload. That turns out to have been dramatically important, because if you're inventing a new application and you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of networks that are interconnected to make the Internet, the last thing in the world you would want is for your application to require you to go to every single network and say, could you change the functionality of the network to support this application? So instead, we said that the Internet layer does not know anything about applications. The only thing that knows about applications are the edges of the net where the computers were. And so you could reinterpret the bits of the packets to be voice or video or a piece of a web page or part of an email or part of some new application that you and I haven't thought of yet. The system was resilient in the face of innovation. And so these are the examples of the kinds of design decisions that we chose to adopt in anticipation that there would be applications that we could not foresee, but that we wanted to be able to prepare. So the layered structure allowed us to add protocols in any layer in order to increase the functionality of the system. So let me, if it's okay, I'd like to go on to another topic for a few minutes, if that's all right. I guess I'm waiting for approval by our, I see Claudia is nodding, so I guess it's okay. If she says
okay, absolutely.
Everything is all right.
Okay, thank you. So this I wanted to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, because I think that is another topic of some interest to this group. The first thing I will observe is that the CEO of a company called Gallup, whose name is Jim Clifton, says that based on his data, only 1 in about 15,000 people is a real entrepreneur. And what does that mean? Well, it's a risk taker. It's someone who believes strongly that they have a solution to a problem and that they know how to solve it, and that they are willing to, push really hard to get there, to be persistent, patient and persistent. And so I think patience and persistence is a very important attribute for successful entrepreneurs. I think they also have to believe that something that, how do I put it? One of my managers once told me that to do the impossible, first you have to believe that it isn't. And I have to say that a lot of what's driven me has been a belief that this is not impossible, and therefore we should try to do it. The second thing, which Clifton points out, which I think is incredibly important, is that the purpose of a company is to create a customer and keep the customer. That's the purpose of a company. And it's not all this other fancy stuff about rewarding stockholders and things like that. It's to create a customer and keep him or her. And what that means is you must be satisfying someone's need. And even if you have this brilliant idea and you think that this is a wonderful, innovative thing to do, if nobody cares, it's very hard to turn that into a business. So creating customers is at the top of the list of desirable outcomes. And the other point I want to make, especially for countries like Poland, which have modest sized populations, is that if you're going to create a business, especially if you're going to create one in the soft sciences, in computer science and online applications and things like that, that it's very smart to try to create services that will serve not only a domestic market, but an international market. And the reason for that should be obvious. The international marketplace is much, much bigger than any domestic marketplace. And so with a few exceptions, countries that have a large enough population may have a large enough domestic market to drive new businesses easily. So China has shown that, the US has shown that. Europe has a very big population, and we could kind of argue over how successful the entrepreneurs have been in driving markets within the European Union. But then smaller countries have a much bigger challenge to grow a business, especially if you're only focused on a domestic market. So I think thinking internationally is generally a good thing. And I think, as I think about Tony's role in AmCham and thinking more generally about internet and its ability to be a platform for domestic and international business, it's vital that the internet allow for very free transfers of data back and forth across international boundaries. And all of you know that there is sensitivity and tension right now. You hear terms like data sovereignty, which I think, if misinterpreted, will vastly interfere with the ability of the internet to serve our collective interests. It certainly could interfere with building a multinational cloud-based system, which is what we've done at Google. If we can't move data back and forth between our data centers freely, we cannot replicate data. We cannot assure people that their data will be protected and saved, even if a data center goes away. So a misinterpretation of data sovereignty could easily torpedo the value of cloud-based systems, something which I hope people who are making policy will take into account. So let me just add one other point, and then I think we should get into a discussion. This has to do with the fact that the internet is such a simple architecture that it's like a lot of other tools. It is neutral and is insensitive to function or application, which means it can be abused, or that you can use it to do harmful things. And everyone on this call is well aware of the wide range of harms that we see happening in the net. Some of those actually occur across international boundaries. And so we now need to face this question of how do we cope with harmful behavior while enhancing the ability of the internet to support constructive and useful international exchange. That is a non-trivial problem for us to solve. Some of the harmful behaviors on the net involve misinformation and disinformation and distribution of malware, denial of service attacks, a wide range of huge challenges. Some of these can be tackled technically by building mechanisms that defend against and prevent some of the bad behaviors, but we can't stop all of them using technical means. So in other cases, we're going to have an agreement that if we find somebody doing something we agree is unacceptable, that there will be consequences. That's post hoc law enforcement. And finally, as a community, we might say, look, just don't do that because it's wrong. It's just morally wrong. And although that sounds like a very weak kind of response, I remind you that gravity is the weakest force in the universe, And yet, when you have enough mass, it's a very powerful force. It keeps the Earth in orbit around the sun. It keeps us on the planet and not flying off of it. So moral force in a large society can be very powerful as well. And we should keep that in mind as we try to steer people in the direction of good behaviors in the internet environment. So I've gone on and on for a while here. I'll stop there. I am certain that there are some interesting ideas, and I can see some of them already in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your great speech, strictly connected with data issues and processing of data issues. Sometimes back, I read your quote that science fiction does not remain fiction for long, and certainly not on the internet. And I strongly agree with that statement. In 2021, will be the year of the Stanisław Lem in Poland, the greatest Polish science fiction writer and futurist. I don't know if you had a chance to read his books.
I have at least 4 of them sitting in my.
Great.
I have a big science fiction library, and Stanisław Lem is there. So yes.
Great. And already more than half a century ago, he indicated that development of the internet is associated with more threats than benefits. I understand that you do not agree with this line of thought. As a vice president of Google, that's my question, simple question. As a vice president of Google, what are the biggest threats you see?
So, well, some I've already touched on, because it's the misbehavior in the network, which we all don't want to see happen, and yet there are all kinds of motivations for people misbehaving and doing harmful things. Some of them are very self-serving. One thing I will tell you is that I think that companies like ours, Google and Facebook and others, should actually be turning to psychologists and anthropologists and biologists to try to understand the motivations behind human behavior, and to understand how some online systems provoke some of the harmful behaviors that we see. To give you an example, I am persuaded, personally anyway, this is not a corporate position, this is just Vinton Cerf, please. But I look at the social networking activities that you see in YouTube and in Facebook and Twitter and some of the others, Instagram and so on. And I think about the reward system that is built into some of those services. And it makes me think that there is a feedback loop which rewards people for the amount of attention that they can get. And so if you think a little bit about how people get attention of other people, sometimes doing something extreme is the easiest way to get attention. And so it could very well be that the feedback loops in these sort of media have the problem that they exacerbate interest in extreme behavior in order to get attention. And what that suggests is that if we understand that, and if I am correct in this assessment, then you need to adapt the feedback loops so as to not reward people for what we'll call inappropriate or harmful extremes. And I think you can see us doing that a little bit in our YouTube system, where you see some things not being monetized, for example, or any recommendations tend to steer away from rather than towards extreme content. And I'm hoping that we will learn more, all of us who work in that space, learn more about what motivations drive people to behave in harmful ways, and try to find ways of countering that. And I am perhaps optimistic about our ability to learn that, but I think we need to understand psychology, biology, and sociology in order to understand how we should adapt our systems in order to enhance the good quality behaviors and suppress the other ones. So that's my immediate thought anyway about coping with some of those problems.
Thanks for very much for your comprehensive answer. I thoroughly built a different image of the area that I deal with all my life. If any of our special guests have questions, now is the time to ask them, I think. Of course, our viewers can also ask questions using below the options Q&A. I promise I will ask Mr. Vinton Cerf the most interesting of them. And now the floor is open for Marcin, Piotr, Rafał, Tomasz.
I would well thank first of all. My name is Rafał Ohm. I'm the guy who deals with emotions, and I'm extremely happy. We are all having you here, and we have a privilege to listen to you and talk to you. I have one comment and one question. The comment is, when I was waiting for the meeting today, I was trying to do this mental exercise. What would be our world like if there is no internet? And to make it even harder or maybe simpler, I thought, what would be the world like with no internet during the pandemics? And I just realized there would be no school. There would be no education. There would be no selling and buying because there's lockdown, and we wouldn't be able to work. I mean, we would only rely on phones, which is like 1% of what we're doing right now. So, dear sir, I think you need a Nobel Prize. I don't know, from physics or from the peace, but you saved our life during the pandemics. See, this is amazing what internet is doing and how internet is making us live in a relatively natural way in such a terrible time like pandemic. So this was the comment.
So, I'm sorry, could I interrupt you for just one moment? First of all, thank you for that. Keep in mind that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to thank for the fact that the internet is still running and it's bearing up under this extreme load and everything else. So let us be thankful for all of them. I did want to mention a book or the novella that was written in 1909 by a man named E.M. Forster. The book was called The Machine Stops. Now remember, this is written in 1909.
Wow.
And he describes a society that lives at home, does not leave their homes. A machine delivers food to them, and the machine allows them to interact and communicate with each other. Now, this is just before radio was widely known. Telephones existed by that time, and in 1909, there was probably increasingly widespread, so you can imagine what he might have been thinking. But astonishingly, the story goes that the machine stops running. And the question is, what happens to that society, which has become extremely dependent upon it? The answer to your question, though, is we have a worked example, because the 1918 Spanish flu occurred at a time when the internet wasn't even a glimmer in anyone's eyes. The society did survive. I'd like to think that it will survive better this time than it did in 1918, despite the rapid proliferation of the COVID-19 disease. So anyway, thank you for letting me intervene. Let's go to your question now.
Oh no, I mean, thank you very much. But minding of time, I will keep the question for later. And now I let other people have the pleasure to talk with you. Thank you very much for your answer to my comment.
Rafał, have no idea if you know, but of course the floor for Nobel Prize nomination is open, because as a self-employed researcher professor, you're appointed to nominate. So all right. I keep my finger crossed for nominations from you. Okay, so right. the second questions from Marcin.
From me, okay. As Maciej mentioned, I'm a lawyer, so of course I need to ask a legal question, a kind of legal question, because from one side we have this beautiful technology and science going around us. On the other hand, we have a lot of fear, and we ask our lawyers, we ask politicians to protect us from the science. And we have such actions like forbidding 5G technology. And my question is, for you as a scientist, are you afraid of lawyers?
Very good question.
Are you afraid that we will block something in your life?
That's a very interesting question. I will tell you that my experiences with the law have largely been unsatisfying because it's complex. It has unexpected side effects. Crazy lawsuits are treated as if they were not crazy because the law has to be as blind as possible. So I have some trepidation whenever the law gets involved. On the other hand, I will say that a society of laws is better than a society of no laws, because then there are no bounds and guardrails on human behavior. And it's my view that the basic contract, the social contract, is that we accept limitations on our behavior in exchange for living in a society which is, we hope, predictable and which protects people's safety and security and perhaps even privacy, although I know that may be a topic of some discussion even today. So my answer is that I believe that law is important, but I also feel a great compulsion to speak to either lawyers or people who make laws, legislators, to try to get to them before they make laws about something they don't know anything about. And, I would like for them to have at least a cartoon model of the internet and how it works before they decide to make laws about it. And I admit to you that this is a long-term project. I've lived in the Washington, D.C. area for 44 years now, and I find myself repeatedly returning to either the legislators or the people in the executive branch to try to help them understand how the net works, because they keep changing. We have these things called elections, and I'm pretty sure you're well aware of the most recent one here. So it's an endless task. But I'm only afraid of lawyers who refuse to listen to reason in the course of their work. And so hopefully some of them will be attentive to authoritative sources.
Thank you very much.
Any other question from our panelists? Yes, Tomasz Orzek, please.
Thank you for the invitation. I had a question, but Maciek already asked it, so let me ask another one. I also like Polish sausage, as some of United States presidents, as you said. But the question is different. I like gravity as well, although I'm a nuclear or particle physicist, so I know that gravity works only in certain range. You cannot expect that gravity will solve all the problems of universe. My question is whether the gravity, you said, gravity of internet will solve everything, or we have to find out some other way to make internet more kind for people, let's say so.
So that's a really interesting question. It's quite an interesting analogy to draw a relationship between the internet and gravity. I was trying to think about how would the Einsteinian model of gravity apply to the internet, and I'm not 100% sure that I can fit my head around that. It's particularly weird that in the Einsteinian model there's no force; it's simply space-time that's bent that causes the motion of the planets and the like. There isn't really a force. And so the notion of graviton is unnecessary in the Einsteinian model. And yet when we get down to particle physics, where you are, we have this question, what is there a gravitational force that's in any way measurable among particles that are down in the atomic range? And I don't have a good answer to that either. But coming back to the internet, it's a tool. It is essentially a tool. And like every tool, it can be abused. And it has been and will be. And so the only thing we can do about this is, we only have three things that we can do, and I alluded to them earlier. If we believe that there is an abusive use of the network, and we have a technical way of inhibiting that abusive behavior, we should use that because that can be very helpful, but it won't always work. And so then we have to turn to the legislators and say, here are behaviors that we agree in this society are unacceptable. And that if you are discovered exhibiting those behaviors, there will be consequences. That's post hoc law enforcement. And again, the issue about cross-jurisdictional problems where a victim is in one country and a perpetrator is another, that requires international cooperation. So I think that the solution to many of the potential hazards that the existence of the internet poses will be a combination of moral suasion, of post hoc law enforcement, and technical implementations. For example, to defend against denial of service attacks or defense against malware, often we can take technical steps to try to cope with that. But a lot of the human behaviors that are harmful don't admit of technical solutions. They can only be dealt with in the sociological sense. And therefore, we have to understand what are the origins of those bad behaviors, what incentives drive them, and how do we change the incentives to drive a behavior that we would prefer.
And last one question from Piotr Mieczkowski from Digital Poland Foundation. And then I promise I will try to ask a question from Q&A option. Piotr.
Thank you. Thank you, Maciej. So very briefly, my question is about satellite connection. Now, still, I believe a lot of people on our planet doesn't have a connection to internet. So I'm curious, what's your view on Starlink or OneWeb? Whether there will be a successful, probably you are aware that just last week, Great Britain tried to acquire OneWeb, which went into bankruptcy. So what is your view on the future of communication, whether it will be 6G, maybe not even 5G, but maybe it will be something different, maybe a satellite connection? I'm just curious.
Remembering for a moment that we're speaking in the internet context, the internet is happy to use anything that will carry packets. And so if Starlink works, we're happy to send our packets to Starlink. If the OneWeb is revived, we're happy to send data that way, or on undersea cables, or on Wi-Fi, or on 5G, or 6G, or 3G, or 4G, which is in some sense the nice feature of the internet design is that it doesn't care about any of those in particular. It just cares that they can carry the bits that we need to move from one place to another. My impression right now of Starlink is that it appears to be working. The open question in my mind is, of course, the economics of it. Will it be affordable? And where will it be available? And I know that Elon Musk is hoping that it will literally cover the entire planet. And frankly, I hope he's successful, because my job at Google as Chief Internet Evangelist is to try to get everybody up online on the internet, or at least make it possible for them to choose to use it. But that requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment. And so the satellite-based systems are one example of that. The other thing which has really surprised me has been the rapid proliferation of intercontinental undersea fiber cable. I've been just astonished at how much is being built. And the costs have come down enough that companies like Google can actually build their own cables now, even without necessarily looking for a partnership to afford the cost. So between that and the increasing examination of radio frequencies that in higher frequencies to give higher capacity, I foresee that internet will continue to be available, and increasingly so, here on this planet. But since you have this wonderful background in this call, I have to tell you that since 1998, a team that I started working with at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and now with all the other NASA laboratories, and with ESA, and with JAXA, and with some of the other space agencies, to design, build, and deploy an interplanetary extension of the internet. We are well on our way. We started with prototype software, which is already in orbit around Mars and on the surface on the rovers. Those prototypes of the interplanetary protocols were launched in 2004. We have since that time refined the protocols and standardized them with the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems, which is a UN organization of all of the spacefaring nations. We are running the latest protocols now on the International Space Station. We've done a number of tests, and there will be more coming with small sats, for example, which are being launched. And we are expecting to be part of the return to the moon, at least the US Artemis mission and Gateway missions that are coming in the mid to late 2020s. So I'm very excited about that. I want to make sure it's understood that we are not building an interplanetary network and then hoping somebody will use it. That is not our strategy. Our strategy is to standardize the protocols, make them freely available. They're available on GitHub and they're open source if anyone wants to use them. What we want is for them to be on board the scientific missions that are launched, whether they're robotic or manned. And if the robotic mission, for example, completes its scientific research, but the device, the spacecraft is still there, I'd like to be able to repurpose it as a node in a store and forward interplanetary backbone. And so we could grow this step by step. And that's the way it's happening right now. And that's the way I anticipate it will happen in the future. So perhaps by the end of this century, we will really have a robust multi-node interplanetary backbone to support both robotic and manned exploration.
Any question from Tony Hush?
Yes, just very quickly. I just wanted to ask, I had an interesting discussion recently, and somebody talked about the danger of cloud essentially becoming sovereign and outside of the control of national regulators as it can become more dispersed and ownership becomes less clear. You know, I mean, cloud presents a great opportunity for business, for people, for public service and ways to do things. Do you think we're ready, though, for a proper worldwide cloud that nobody really touches?
So this is a very interesting question, Tony. First of all, I will say that clouds are built out of equipment that is sitting in somebody's jurisdiction. So this is not magic, and it's not in the fifth dimension somewhere. It's right here on planet Earth. And in every one of those data centers, whether it's ours or Azure's or Amazon's, sit in somebody's jurisdiction. And operating a system requires some cooperation and compliance with the local laws. I mean, there's no getting around that. So that's the first point. The second point, though, which I want to emphasize as strongly as I can, is that cloud-based systems derive their resilience because you can move data back and forth between the data centers. And of course, at Google, we do this on a constant basis. We build a special purpose, super high bandwidth network, much of which is undersea, linking the data centers in different countries, in order to replicate data, so that if the whole data center is wiped out, all the data is still preserved. And we pledge that to our customers, that their data and its preservation is very important to us and to them as well. So I think we have to be conformant with local laws. And the ideal situation, of course, would be that the laws are somehow compatible at their international edges so that it doesn't inhibit the ability to move data around relatively freely. I think that there is one other phenomenon which is beginning to show up, and it's relevant to the way in which you phrased your question. A number of the cloud providers are beginning to realize that the customers are saying, I really don't want to be trapped in this one company's cloud. I would much rather be able to choose, to work with multiple clouds. This reminds me of the internet problem, because the original situation was that there were separate networks that didn't interconnect with each other, and they were isolated. And my idea, Bob Kahn's idea, was to figure out how do we interconnect them so that anyone on any one of those networks could communicate with anyone else. So I have the same sense that cloud providers are coming to a similar conclusion, driven in part by customer demand. And so at Google, our response to that is a system called Anthos, which allows containers to run not only on the Google Cloud, but on other clouds as well. And so the customers have the freedom to put their data and their software wherever they want to, possibly even running on 2 different clouds at the same time and exchanging data. We're not exactly where we would need to be in order to allow that kind of concurrence to happen. But it's my honest hope as a technologist that we will get to the point where inter-cloud is as reliable and interesting and useful as internet has been for the last 40 years or so.
Super, thank you very much.
As I know, Marcin, the answer and question was also very interesting for him. Okay, so I will try to find some questions from Q&A chat, but more of the question was asked in Polish, so I'll try to translate, maybe from Paulina Jastrzębska. The question, how will technology development influence the creation of new professions in the field of technology? I understand these questions as what new professions will arise in the modern world?
So, I think that we can understand the answer to that question by looking back a little bit in history. If we go back 20 years or so, and we see the World Wide Web showing up. Now, remember, this is Tim Berners-Lee working at CERN, releasing this in December of 1991. Not too many people noticed, except there were 2 guys at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications, Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina, who said, gee, this is really interesting, but what if it had a graphical user interface? What if it looked more like a magazine? So they developed something called Mosaic. And it was a spectacular success because it really did make the internet look like a magazine. And people learned to create a hypertext markup language web pages. And the interesting thing is that they learned from each other, because the browsers of the day had a function called show source, which allowed the users of web pages to see what hypertext markup language was used to produce the page and whatever interesting features it had. So the webmasters essentially learned from each other by way of open source. And so one possible propagation for new kinds of work will be triggered by this kind of sharing and understanding of how the web is being used. We're already seeing evidence of another class of work showing up. Many of the people on this call are familiar with the Internet of Things. These are programmable devices that have internet capability, and they may populate the house, light bulbs and office appliances and home appliances and things like that. And you can imagine that this could get fairly complex fairly quickly if there are 100 devices in the house. And if you think that doesn't sound reasonable, people have light bulbs that have internet addresses in them, and you can remotely interact with them. I think that the complexity of managing a smart house with a lot of internet-enabled devices in it will lead to a job where somebody comes in and helps to organize and manage and configure your house for you, and then turn control over it to you. I'm convinced that we will see new kinds of work showing up, as has already happened when it comes to fulfillment, for example, of demand for products and services that can be delivered through the net. That's one kind of interesting work that can be done. Look at what happened with Wipro and Infosys in India. They blossomed as businesses supplying software to people in the other parts of the world and delivering that software through the network. So, I think that now the next possibility is remote medicine. Those IoT devices becoming sensors and become available for remote diagnostics and allow doctors to deliver their services without necessarily being in proximity to you. I noticed one of the questions was the pandemic and how, what are the impacts of that? And one of those things is, as was introduced earlier, they're going to school online has now become more possible than before. It's still not very satisfactory. I think we need more work on the tools, which is yet another opportunity for someone to build better applications to help us work remotely in a collaborative way. Also, finding ways of managing the students who otherwise will try to mess up the classroom by injecting content that the teacher didn't intend, or just generally causing trouble. That was a surprise that a lot of teachers encountered, I think, was that the students were able to figure out how to abuse the online system before the teachers had any tools for doing something about it. So once again, another opportunity for new design work and new engineering. So my sense, again, is that software is an endless frontier. We're only limited by what we can figure out how to program.
Because our time is running out, I think that the last one question from Małgorzata Sobol, I think it's a very good question to summarize our discussion. Is it true that the global companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon not only constantly change our world, but as a matter of fact, they govern the world along maybe with such superpowers like United States or China? And the traditional democracy, liberal values of so-called Western world just fade away.
So first of all, I would point out that that in the internet world, companies that seem to be up and on top often disappear. You remember MySpace, for example, and you can name a number of companies that have come and gone. So the first thing is that a success today does not guarantee success tomorrow. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that Google and its engineers are running as fast as they can, because, in the back of my mind anyway, I imagine that there are two people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin in some college dorm who are inventing something that will be better than what we've already got. And so, we're running like crazy to try to keep up or keep ahead. I don't think that, well, first of all, I think we should be concerned about how these services and platforms are used and abused. We must understand the dynamics of that. We must understand mechanisms for reducing the level of potential hazard. One thing I will tell you with regard to misinformation and disinformation, which is a topic of considerable concern right now, is that the most valuable filter we can have is right here. It's in the wetware. It's called critical thinking. It's very much like the scientific method, where you ask questions like, where did this information come from? Is there any corroborating evidence that will support an assertion that's being made? Is someone putting this information up to convince me of something that I don't really want to be convinced of? Those are normal critical thinking questions that people should be asking. And often they don't, maybe because if you got an answer you didn't like, then you wish you hadn't asked the question. I think young children should be taught this notion of critical thinking, partly for its benefit in this out of concern for misinformation and disinformation, but also because it introduces you to scientific thinking. And although I don't think everyone should be a scientist necessarily, I think the value of thinking like a scientist is extremely powerful. And so I would love to see that become a normal part of our curriculum, partly because it will also defend against some of the harmful behaviors we see in today's internet.
So would you say critically think instead of Google it?
Actually, no. I would say that Googling it is a way of finding out what is known about something. And we try very hard to produce what we hope are, the rank ordering is, we hope, ordered so that the good quality information is at the top. But I think you can't do critical thinking if you don't have access to the information to think about, to compare, and to evaluate. And so showing you what's on the web is the input to the critical thinking function. And the critical thinking function is the one that lets you figure out what to accept and what to reject.
All right. Thank you.
Whoa! So thank you very much for such interesting, inspiring, I think, speech. Personally, I'm touched that you know Lem and you read him. In today's Polish Parliament, the Polish Parliament will pass a resolution declaring 2021 the years of Lem. So maybe we can invite you to Poland after, of course, pandemic time. And I think that after the inspiring lecture and discussion, any of us have any doubts about the future of the internet, the value of data will keep growing. What will change is how we treat them. I would like to thank our special guest for an inspiring lecture, and of course to all of you for so much activity, and see you on the technology trial in future. I wish everyone good health, of course, and I hope we will be able to meet traditionally in future. Thank you very much for such meeting.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here. Be well, wash your hands, wear your masks, and avoid COVID-19 if you can.
Care about yourself.
Let's see each other next year when it's safe to do so.
I have just one point, because I would like to, Claudia, could you show us your work?
Yes, I will do it in a few seconds. I need to share my iPad, which should be easy. So just 1 second, and it will come. Yes, there you go. So I will also need a little bit of time to finish it.
Wow.
But here it is.
Beautiful.
So here's where
Claudia. Wow.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Oh my. Thank you. I started here. So here's where we started our meeting. And as you can see, there is some lines. Some of them are connected, some of them are not. But these are the main points, so to speak, that I caught during the meeting. And this is actually my this is the last part that I was working on, so I still need to finish it. But this is about this critical thinking, right? We can, as it was said, we can Google it, but still we need to have our own brain in the place and have access to it, and just simply use
everything
it.
was prepared during the last 1 hour. Jesus Christ.
Yes, I mean,
So I'm shocked. Absolutely.
including actually putting our special guest inside of it. I didn't have a template.
Okay.
I was in a rush, so yes, everything was created.
Just imagine that Claudia accompanies all your speeches. You would have the most amazing book ever.
And you are the second hero of our meeting today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
I am very, very impressed. You made a rather rambling conversation into something which is crisp and terse. This is really skilled. You are really good. This is impressive.
Thank you very much. That's my role here. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Everybody of you will get this fantastic, Claudia. Thank you very much. It's very interesting because Claudia knows only the subject of our meetings, and then she has to do her job, and every time it's really, really great. But of course, it's because of our special guests and very interesting subjects. So thank you, Vinton, for your great presentation. I would like to thank all our guests. Thank you, Rafał. Thank you, Tomasz. Thank you, Tony, Marcin. I don't know if I've said about everybody, and Maciej, of course. Maciej, it was great moderating. I would like just say that December 9th, we will have a special guest, Mark Esposito, professor from Harvard University and the father not of internet, but I would say of Industry Revolution 4.0 in the US. Thank you very much.
And the internet, and just one sentence, the internet has not disappointed us today. So
no, it worked.
Great, it worked. Thank you very much. It was really great meeting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yeah. And for you, Tony, too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dziękuję wszystkim. Do zobaczenia i dziękujemy za tak liczną obecność.
Cześć Rafał, tak w ogóle.
Super. Cześć. Tam już działamy w naszych sprawach.
Dobrze, dzięki, cześć.
No, cześć.
To biznes taki pomiędzy, rozumiem.
Pomiędzy,
Trzymajcie
tak,
się.
pomiędzy każda sekunda wykorzystana.
Tak, liczy się. Cześć, do zobaczenia,
Cześć.
dzięki.